Okay,
Okay, folks, we are going to start our June 8th City Council study session. We have
three items
items.
on our public agenda. We have the 2026 Fire Department update, Mayo Field update, and then we have a 2026 legislative session update. And then we will have two closed sessions after we recess from here. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chief Puller, who's going to talk about the fire department and things that are happening there.
All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for the time. Really appreciate it. So, at your request or from earlier this spring, we wanted to give you guys an update on overall happenings in the fire department, as well as the progress of our current strategic plan. So we're going to take some time. We're going to talk about key accomplishments for the department for the year, updates to that strategic plan, overview of current operations and staffing considerations, and then going to give you a preview for a request to submit a FEMA SAFER grant, which will be coming to you more than likely next week at the regular council meeting. So some big things that happened this year. One is we added a second battalion chief per shift. That was one of the to-do items from the legacy strategic plan. We were able to accomplish this at a zero tax levy increase by repurposing some existing positions within the organization that were unfilled. Secondly, improved technology and related initiatives for electronic documentation. So being an outside chief, putting fresh eyes on our operations and our data, a little surprised at maybe a lack of consistent data reporting over the years. So investing in our staff and making sure they understand the importance of kind of telling our story so that I can come to you with requests when warranted and paint a picture as to why that's necessary. An emphasis this year on enhanced training, some changes in our training division, some really good opportunities as far as like joint training with our neighbors and partners. We've got an upcoming full-scale exercise for active shooter countywide at one of the local high schools. Improved metrics and deployment review. So we brought in an outside contractor that we'll talk about in a bit, known as Fitch & Associates, to put eyes on our data and get a third-party opinion about how we're operating and how we stack up against different national standards, and we'll talk quite a bit about that. And then finally, a big emphasis this year on modernizing our policies. We want to make sure that as we ask more and more of our firefighters that they know what the playing field looks like and they're playing from a good playbook. So we've implemented, or we are currently implementing a product called Lexipol. It's one of the largest vendors for public safety policy in the nation. Our police currently use Lexipol. Fire used to be a Lexipol customer back in the day. That project never materialized 20-some years ago, so we kind of dusted the cobwebs off of it, and we're implementing with modern policies and rolling that out to the entire organization. So like I mentioned earlier, Fitch & Associates is a firm that we brought in from the outside. They have clients in the fire, EMS, and public safety realm in all 50 states, nearly every Canadian province, and 12 different countries. And they've got some bigger organizations across the nation. So our end goal with them is to draft what's known as a standard of cover. That's a very robust document that's used in the accreditation world. It looks at all of your incident data, your community risk, different trends, the growth of your city, and then looks at current deployment models and make sure that you're deploying your resources as effectively as possible. That's going to be probably another 4 to 5 months before we see that standard of cover document materialize, but we have gotten some draft documents from them that will share some highlights with you here throughout this report. Once that SOC, that standard of cover, is done, we'll come back to you at a future study session and go through that in greater detail. We did ask them for some deliverables on the front end. We told them some of our priorities from them is we wanted their analysis of our current station location, of our current 5 stations. We wanted them to look at the proposed Station 6 location to kind of verify that location makes sense for the way our city is growing. And then we also wanted their opinion as to the plan. The plan currently is to redeploy one of the 2 downtown engines to that 6th station once it's built, and wanted to have them look at the impact of what that would be for the workload for our current apparatus downtown. So the good news is, in their opinion, all these things are viable. The current station locations work well, assuming that you guys are comfortable with the current travel time to emergency scenes, and we'll talk quite a bit about that coming up. It is important to note, and we'll talk quite a bit about this later, that our current travel time to emergency scenes does not meet national standards. There are no national standards police. We won't get in trouble for that, but that's a policy decision that the city council and the fire chief get to make together. But if you're comfortable with the current response travel times, then our stations are in good locations as they sit. And also, Station 6 will help those residents in that neighborhood, once that station is up and running, meet national standard times. And they did confirm that moving engine from the downtown station to the new Station 6, while it will have a drastically increased workload on the existing companies downtown, it is a tenable work environment at that time. So that is a viable option for us. So we kind of have two different plans I want to talk about with you. One is we talked about a year ago called the 8-step plan that was drafted by the previous fire chief. The 8-step plan in many ways is a plan within a plan. So the 8-step plan was Chief Kurska, the previous fire chief's way to come up with a plan to staff Station 6 when it was ready to go live. That was part of a larger plan known as the 2021 to 2040 strategic plan. I don't have a slide on the 2021 to 2040 strategic plan, but there are some things that aren't in the 8-step plan that I want to hit on that we've accomplished already. We've got multiple divisions within the department, and there was some help needed in some of those divisions, one of them being emergency management. So part of that 2021 plan included building out the fire department's capabilities in the emergency management realm. That has been accomplished by the city. So we have an assistant chief and a captain of fire in emergency management. And in my opinion, that's going well. I think the city administrator would agree that the current EM model works well for our city. So that's a good thing that's been accomplished through the 2021 to 2040 plan. Expansion of the fire marshal's division. So the fire marshals are responsible for code enforcement, plan review, and then post-fire investigation. As our city grows, especially with the construction downtown, there is a ton of plan review and fire inspection to accomplish. Back in 2021, the department was maybe lacking a few full-time employees in the fire marshal's division. That has since, through the recommendations of that plan, been recruited for and filled, and the fire marshal's division is sitting in a good place right now. So that's the update for the fire marshal's division back to the 2021 to 2040 strategic plan. Fleet in that plan, the chief called that a division of one. So we have one fire department mechanic. That's our fleet division. His suggestion back then was to bolster that. I know since then there's been a lot of work underway to centralize the citywide fleet and the fleet of mechanics. We still have a division of one. We have one mechanic, but I'm confident that with some coordination with existing city fleet that we can meet the fire department's fleet needs without adding additional mechanics in the short term. I also want to point out that in one of the opening pages of that 2021 to 2040 plan, one of the largest vulnerabilities in the department, as identified by the previous fire chief, was our department's single incident capability, basically saying that we can only respond to one structure fire and that we're tapped out for resources. That's a scary thing for a fire chief. His next quote goes on to say, "Help may not be on its way." And that's true today. So we have 26 firefighters a day. That's enough to respond to one structure fire with a few firefighters left over. That's all we had in 2021 when that plan was drafted. That's all we have today. And that theme will get reiterated throughout the presentation this afternoon. He does go on then towards the end of that report to recommend hiring 6 additional firefighters to bolster ladder truck staffing, which is the same concept that I brought to you last year when we asked to apply for a SAFER grant. So that's part of the presentation later as well today. But I just wanted to let you know that it wasn't a novel concept that I had come up with. That was actually, that groundwork was laid by Chief Kurska back in 2021 in his strategic plan. But now we'll jump into the 8-step plan, which we talked quite a bit about last time when we applied for the SAFER grant. I'll let you know where we are in all these steps. So step 1 in that 8-step plan was to add an assistant chief of operations. That was completed back in January of 2024. Step 2 was to add a supervisor. At that time was meant to manage to be built yet EMS division. So that position was budgeted for and recruited for, and we hired back July of 25. However, we're not moving forward with the EMS division. We used that position back to the concept earlier of adding a battalion chief. That that FTE was reallocated as one of our new 24-hour battalion chiefs, because in my opinion, we need more firefighters in the fire stations, available 24 hours a day to respond to calls, not more administrators. So we repurposed that administrative body to become a 24-hour battalion chief. Step 3 was to add 3 EMTs to the organization to respond to EMS and lift assist incidents. We have not hired those individuals yet. There's no short-term plan to do so, but we open to the conversation here today about the future of that. Step 4 was to purchase land for a Northwest Fire Station. That was completed with your blessing on 2/25. Step 5 was to add 7 EMTs and a supervisor to expand EMS capacity, freeing up some workload for one of the downtown engines to move to that new Northwest Fire Station. We're not there yet, and again, I'm not keen on hiring EMS-specific employees. I do believe you get a lot more out of an employee that can do both fire and EMS. It's important to note that every EMT is not a firefighter, but every firefighter is an EMT. So by hiring a firefighter, you get somebody that can do 2 disciplines versus just 1 discipline. Step 6 was to add 3 battalion chiefs to support development and leadership capacity. That has been done. We did it again through repurposing of other administrative positions in the organization. So we had a vacancy at assistant chief that we did not fill. We had the EMS captain spot that we repurposed, and then we had an 8-hour training chief that did not respond to incidents but worked administratively. We repurposed those 3 positions to come up with the 24-hour battalion chiefs. Then step 7 is to construct the station, and step 8 is to relocate an engine from downtown to that station. Those are, have not yet been accomplished. Those are more long-term goals in the coming years. And if you guys have any questions throughout this, please, I don't want to be just me talking to you, jump in and ask.
Mayor Norton?
Thank you. I did have a question. I'm trying to think back to the discussion we had when Chief Kurska was here. And as I recall, a lot of the discussion had to do with, we live in a town with very high medical incidents, and we wanted to be able to have, less of deploying everyone, but having enough specific people there that could deal with medical issues. And I hear your comment about, trained in a firefighter also does EMS. My question would be, what's the cost differential between hiring an EMS and hiring a full firefighter that does EMS?
Yeah, so we didn't repurpose that slide from last year. It was included in last year's presentation, but it was much closer than you would think, and I can't give you the exact number off the top of my head, because both would be full-time employees, right? So they're subject to bargaining and wherever they fall, however that gets bargained out. But they're also going to be subject to health insurance and retirement and everything else. Those costs are relatively the same whether they're a firefighter or an EMT. So the savings, I want to say, was I would say an EMT-only employee is probably about $20,000 a year, and I'm shooting from the hip here, cheaper than, say, a firefighter who can do both skills.
Okay, and so you're just choosing to hire the firefighter who has the EMS talents and just paying more, which means you'll have a little money cut someplace else.
Correct.
You've made that choice. Okay.
And we'll get into the EMS workload in a little bit. I think what I struggle with is, so in the state of Minnesota, as a city, we're not legally bound to provide the ambulance service, right? So the state parses out real estate throughout the state called PSAs, or primary service areas, and private companies go to bid for those PSAs. So we have a company here in our city that has bid to be the ambulance provider in our city. So the question is, well, how much taxpayer dollar do we throw at supporting a private company that bid for that service? So as the fire chief, I'm happy to support them, and end of the day, we want to save lives. But should we be adding, I think the question for all of us is, should we be adding full-time employees to the city payroll that are here to support a company that bid for that service? Does that make sense?
And is this not Mayo Clinic's? It used to be
The
Gold Cross, and Mayo Clinic bought it out, if I remember.
Gold Cross was, yeah, it's been, even when it was Gold Cross recently, whenever they bought it a long time ago.
Yeah, when I first moved.
So Mayo Clinic Ambulance Service is the provider for this area. I do think that that's a valid question. I also don't know that we had, at the time that we were doing the analysis, included how much overtime you pay someone is really different if they're a firefighter than if they're just EMS. So I don't believe that that was calculated in some of the prior chiefs' financials. So you end up in a higher overtime situation typically because they're not considered the 24-hour. There's a lot of unique things from a bargaining and labor perspective. The largest savings was that you were moving an engine company instead of adding an engine company.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is federal FLSA law. So firefighters don't accrue overtime until they work beyond 52 hours a week, whereas an EMT-only employee works 40 hours a week, and then they're subject to overtime. So there are some cost savings for having a firefighter EMT because you can get more hours of work out of them before they start accruing their overtime rate.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, let me just add this, because I appreciate you going through the old 8 steps, but we really did make a call to do a different plan here over a year ago and going away from that. But having this discussion on overtime and just nominal costs really wasn't the way we made the decision years before to say we're going to the EMT. It really had to do with when you get further on and see the workload that's in that sort of call-outs that are full fire departments and thinking there was a more efficient way to do that. So to now, I just want to correct the record, at least in my mind, that wasn't made on a 20% overtime differentials. It was based on the idea of separating real firefighter work and focusing on that, and then separating out this major workload that we could do differently to free up our firefighters. And now we're going in a different direction. And again, I went through this with you before, and I've come to the conclusion that like there's other things at play here, but I didn't want to leave the discussion that it had to do with 20% overtime costs. That's not how these things were made.
Oh, I got you. And definitely, we got some slides coming up about more efficient ways to provide some low acuity EMS calls as well. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But back to the fire side. So calls for service continuing to rise, just like most fire departments across the nation. People are more and more likely to call 911 as their first line of solving problems, whether medical or other in nature. Our city is growing, right? Both, I'd say north, south, east, west, but also up as we see the downtown skyline continue to evolve. So let's talk a little bit about the building situation in the city. So there are currently 20 active multifamily projects underway. 11 of these are 3 stories in height, which comes to the classification of a garden-style apartment, and we'll come back to that in a little bit because there are national standards on that. And then 9 are greater than 3 stories, ranging from 4 to 15. And then once you start getting in those upper ranges, you're talking about high-rise, which is also its own unique challenge, and there are national standards on that. So that's the current ongoing projects. There are an additional 13 in the pipeline, 2 more garden-style at 3-story, and 11 that are taller than that, ranging from 4 to 11. So more high-rises on the way as well. And then we've got the geographic coverage, that north, south, east, west challenge, and that's where Station 6 comes into the works here. But there is a need at some point to provide equitable fire service across the city for all those new homes being built to the northwest. If you haven't driven out there recently, I would encourage you to. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of homes already currently built and hundreds more in the pipeline. It's going to be drastically changing out that way soon.
Councilmember Miller.
On that point of new construction, can you talk about the risk profile from older neighborhoods, mid-century neighborhoods, newer neighborhoods, and how that comes into play with the risk analysis?
Right. So our risk analysis from Fitch is not complete yet, but I can tell you, in general, we see more fires in older homes. So like the downtown adjacent area, there's a 100-year-old housing stock down here, right? So those are just more prone to fires, older wiring, maybe deferred maintenance, whatnot. They also tend to be smaller homes. So socioeconomics are different a little bit. But then also newer homes, while they don't burn as often, when they do, they fail faster. Roofs fail faster, floors cave in faster. So while we don't see a large number of fires, especially maybe say Northwest where Station 6 is proposed, there are new homes that are being built there. And when they do start on fire, it's going to be a dangerous environment for both the people living in those homes and the firefighters responding, especially if they're responding from further away, because that roof is going to fail that much faster. Those floors are going to cave in that much quicker. Station 6, just a quick update here on the screen. That's the parcel of land that was bought last year by the council. The little oval area to the upper right corner is the spot that's proposed to be retained for Station 6 when we're ready to break ground. That site's about 5.8 acres. It does include some stormwater retention area because that's the lowest laying chunk of land, so there are a lot of drainage concerns about it. 5.8 is probably a bit more than we need, but we went with the footprint of our largest current station to buy us some time until we can really dial in what exactly we want that station to look like. Also, some extra space for some training props and whatnot. We do currently have access to a county-run training facility southeast, but for that crew that's going to be there in the future to go from that location all the way southeast, that's going to be a 30-plus minute drive. We prefer to keep them closer in their own territory as much as possible, so if we can incorporate a small training prop area there, that's going to keep them in their firehouse more often.
Councilmember Fredericks.
With the current density we're building at out there, how far beyond that will that be good for?
That's a great question. Every council meeting I feel like I go to, you guys are asking another 40 acres. So whenever you guys slow down on that, we'll have a better understanding of what the future need is going to be. I think that buys us really good coverage for that part of town, even with some future annexations. I think the next logical question would be like southeast. There are some needs. There's already high demand there and a longer drive time from, say, Station 5. But that's well in the future. But I'm confident this will buy us many years of northwest coverage. All right, now we'll go into some operational updates. So this chart gives us kind of a call breakdown for the past 5 years of different call types. The top one is like active fire, so something actually burning, whether it's a home or a house or a car or something else. So we're saying about 2/3 of the days of the year, we've got something actually on fire somewhere in our city. The next column down with those bigger numbers, or next row down with those bigger numbers, are other fire responses. So these are things that get called in and dispatched maybe as a house fire. So we're getting numerous fire apparatus on the road, and then they get there and realize it's something lower acuity. It's a burnt pizza, it's faulty electrical in a building or something like that. Also includes things like elevator rescues, water rescues, cats and trees, all those sorts of cliche things that you think about firefighters responding to. So kind of a catch-all category. But back to one of the questions earlier about maybe sending fewer fire resources on calls. I think there is a lot of room to be had, a lot of progress to be made in the dispatch center. Right now, the default is we send everything to everything. That's not the norm in a lot of places. I think we can give better guidance to our dispatchers to ask more critical questions and then make a more informed decision and send fewer resources to a lot of these calls. To see that big of a disparity between the smaller number of active fires being found, but that higher number, in the thousands of other fire responses, we can get much more nuance in there because many of those responses involve 5, 6, 7, or 8 fire trucks at one time. They don't need to. The next big number you see there are those are EMS responses. So we're looking at 7,000 to 8,000 EMS responses a year. You'll see a dip down in 24 and 25, and that's to a change that we made in partnership with our partners at Mayo Ambulance in what we call the algorithm, for lack of a better term. So what happens right now when somebody calls 911? If anybody here were to call and say, my neighbor's having a heart attack, send an ambulance. A call gets answered here in this building by a Rochester dispatcher, and they ask 2 questions. Are they awake? Are they breathing? If the answers to those is yes, they then put that caller on hold, and they call Mayo Ambulance Dispatch by phone, and they transfer that call over, and there's an inherent delay there. We'll talk about that delay in a little bit. Then Mayo launches what they call the algorithm, and it's a computer-based algorithm that, depending on how the caller answers the previous question, dictates the next question in that algorithm. And at the end, it spits out one of like 600 different codes, and you can assign different resource types to those codes. So of those 600 or so codes, about 300 of them involve sending a Rochester fire engine. So if one of those 300 pops up, that Mayo dispatcher gets back on the phone, calls our dispatcher back and says, please send a fire engine along with that call to 123 Broad Street or Broadway or whatever the address is. And then we get dispatched. I can tell you that there is a lot of wiggle room in that algorithm to look at sending fewer Rochester fire engines to these calls. And we'll talk about some of that in the next couple slides here. But you'll see in 24 and 25, there are fewer EMS calls in 22 and 23. That's because we tweaked the algorithm and said we're confident we don't need a fire engine on these certain buckets of call types to help the ambulance. So we shaved about 1,000, 1,500 EMS calls out of the system for us. So that's great. We can probably shave another 1,000 out of that if we got a bit more critical. But even with shaving out that 1,000, that 1,500 EMS calls, you see at the bottom, we're still treading water with our call volume. We're not actually saving calls because the city's still growing. There are more people here coming to live here and work here and having to call 911. So these efforts that we're
Councilmember Miller.
doing, great, but they're just saving, they're helping us tread water, they're not actually decreasing our calls for service.
Councilmember Miller.
So to that point, though, it looks like other fire responses is the primary driver of increasing call volumes.
Correct, right.
You said
Because
that's,
with more people on the road, more car accidents,
Sure.
more cats and trees.
but you also mentioned dispatch improvements, changes to that process could shave off some of those volumes.
Well-
Do you have an estimate for what you would hope for if that were?
Right. So we probably can't, actually, this is just run numbers. It's not representative of how many resources are tied to each run number. So we're still gonna have to respond to all those other fire responses, but we could probably do so safely with 1 or 2 apparatus, not 5 or 6 apparatus in many cases. So by freeing up those other 4 or 5 fire engines, now they're available for other calls in their home territory and not coming across town for what's not actually an emergency.
And is there a way to further categorize those? I mean, it seems like such a high volume
Yeah,
to
we
represent.
went super big buckets here just for space and time. Like this gets broken down. There are national reporting criteria. So there's a million different buckets that these fit into.
It just feels hard to interpret that when that's driving so much of the volume and it's not a clear category like active fire, EMS, hazmat. I mean, those feel like very tangible things, and the catch-all being nearly half of the total, it's just difficult to interpret.
Sure. And we could definitely give you some follow-up information. I see Deputy Chief Ferguson in the back making some notes. Again, like we were up against, well, what can you actually absorb through a slide, during a presentation? We can give you some more granular data on that.
Councilmember Wall.
As one who formerly spent a lot of time with hundreds or thousands of people every week in large gatherings, I would estimate that about once every 2 years we required an emergency call. And almost always it was police showing up first with limited equipment. They have a lot of mobile units. And fire was almost always second. And they came in with more equipment and expertise. And then finally, Gold Cross or Mayo would show up with gurneys or whatever needed to be done. And I will tell you, certainly as one who led a large organization, that was very reassuring. We continually added levels of expertise and knew that the citizens were getting really high quality care. So I just endorse certainly a level of care that I think leads to great outcomes here in Rochester.
No, message received for sure. I get that. I'm not proposing that we don't go to any medicals. I'm just saying being a bit more surgical with the ones that we do and trying to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. And speaking of that, so we mentioned that algorithm and how that dispatch algorithm spits out about one of 600 different codes. So we can get really nuanced with the EMS data and the call types that we go to. The problem is Mayo does not routinely share that code back with us. So we approached them and asked, hey, can we start a 6-week trial where for those 6 weeks, your dispatcher, in addition to calling back and asking for help, when they ask for that help to our dispatcher, they share with them that code so that we can then start tying what skills we're doing on scene to different codes. So we can say, okay, on these certain call types, we know we're making a difference. So they agreed. Over that 6 weeks, there are 547 runs that fell into this category. Kind of the surprising thing for me, at least, was 40% of the time on those calls, we were canceled, like we never even made patient contact. So that means of that almost 600 calls, 40% of those, we never even got out of the rig and saw a patient. I would argue that's not a good use of taxpayer dollars. So if we could take a more granular look and say, all right, we know now widely that in these certain buckets, we never even make it to the scene or get out of the rig. Well, why are we sending the fire engine in the first place? That would be prudent, I would feel. So this slide here represents just the 6 EMS buckets that represented the most of that sample size. So the categories are on the bottom. The blue represent times that we were canceled, that we never even saw a patient. The orange represents that we got there more than likely first before the ambulance, and we performed a patient assessment. So maybe we took their pulse or blood pressure, maybe we got their name, so general feeling about their disposition, but then turned care over to the ambulance crew when they got there. Green means we provided a level of medical care, and then red is other, and I'm not quite sure what's included in the other category. But then, interestingly, we've shared this slide with our crews in the fields in preparation for this talk, and the message we received overwhelmingly is that green, so the BLS, it's basic life support, the BLS provided, which means we did some sort of medical care or would indicate that we did medical care. Our crew tells us that due to limitations in our reporting system, that category they feel is routinely overused as a catch-all, and actually is probably, a lot of that green is probably actually more orange, that they actually aren't providing patient care for a high number of these calls. So back to that, the importance of gathering better data. We've recognized that as a shortcoming. Our reporting software is built for fire reports, not for medical. So we are in the process of standing up what's called an EPCR, Electronic Patient Care Reporting System, that will give our EMTs and paramedics in the field much more nuanced ability to document what they actually are doing on these calls. Like, I would love to tell you on these certain categories of calls, we performed CPR X% of the time, or we delivered a certain medication X% of time, or wound care, or bandaging, or whatever it is, applying a splint to somebody. But given the current limitations in our reporting software, we can't do that. But the overwhelming message is for many of these buckets, and again, there are 600 different buckets, and we didn't want to overwhelm the slide with 600 buckets of call types. But many of these were canceled without ever seeing a patient, and most times when we do see a patient, we're not actually providing any medical care. We're just there biding time for the ambulance to show up. And that still has value for sure. I'm not saying we wouldn't go to those calls. I think we need to make informed decisions about what we're doing with our resources.
Councilmember Miller.
Quick question on the slide. Since these are the highest volume call types, do you have a sense of, per these 5 categories, how many calls are represented in that bar?
Chris, do you happen to have the end for these off the top of your head?
About 800, I think.
Well, I think the whole sample size was 547, right? I think 800 total, but a few weren't dispatched, didn't pass the code on through.
Okay.
So we had 547 total in the bucket, but of that 547, off the top of my head, I can't tell you the count for these 6 specific.
Okay.
But we can follow up with you on that too, because we do have that. And again, I just want to drive home that this was a limited trial, right? This was 6 weeks in length, so I would never propose making any sort of organizational response changes off of 6 weeks of data. But in my opinion, that information should be shared routinely between our private EMS partner and our dispatch center and us, so that we can make, after a year or two, make educated decisions on, okay, maybe we shouldn't be going to certain call types under certain circumstances. This is a repeat slide from our presentation a year ago, but just showing overall number of fire calls per 1,000 of population on the left. It's a bit dated, but it's from 2011 to 2023, showing that even as population rises, the number of calls per person continues to rise, indicating that people are just more reliant on the 911 system every year. In the same category on the right, but specific for EMS calls. So one dip down during 2020. During COVID across the nation, there were just fewer EMS calls as patients stayed home and didn't go out and get themselves hurt or injured. But overall, people are continuing to call 911 in our city per population more often than ever before. There's no sign that would ever decrease, and this is standard across the nation in every city. People are just relying on 911 to be their first attempt to solve a problem, whether it's fire or EMS based. This slide was at the request of the council to talk about the number of firefighters we have per population compared to peer cities. Peer cities was a bit challenging to wrap our heads around, so what we tried to do was come up with Midwestern cities of somewhat similar populations, so that 100,000 to 200,000 per population range. And then we tried to find cities that weren't part of a metro area, that didn't have access to routine automatic aid. Because what's unique here with us, or somewhat unique, is that we have no full-time mutual aid partners. We work with our volunteer partners around us, which is great. They're great partners, but they have limitations being volunteers, right? They're responding from home or work to their firehouse when a call comes in, waiting for other volunteers to show up, and then taking a fire engine elsewhere to help out. And also they have just different community risks than we have. So we have very unique risks in our city, like the number of high-rise buildings, the international airport, that it's not fair for us to expect, say, a firefighter from EOTA to train on airport operations or high-rise operations. They don't have that themselves. Like, they have very limited time. They're already giving back to their community of their own valuable free time to say, hey, come over to Rochester once a year and train on the airport stuff. Like, that's not going to happen. So we tried to find comparable cities that also had, maybe just based on looking at a map, limited other cities around them that are likely to have career fire departments. Then the column says number of firefighters. I should actually retitle that. It should be number of full-time employees, because our 115 also includes all of our 8-hour admin staff, our civilian staff, and everything as well. But trying our best to compare apples to apples. Like, we didn't have time to call the fire chief of all these communities and ask them all the nuanced specifics of how they staff their organization. So we just looked at their published budget or the published org chart and said, how many full-time employees do they have? So this probably includes some of their fire marshals and civilians, just like our number includes as well. But for a quick slide for a study session, this is the most accurate we can come up with. And you can see that we just rank far behind our other Midwest neighbors for number of firefighters per 10,000 of population, when looking at other cities that probably don't have mutual aid partners being in the same predicament that we are in.
Councilmember Wall.
I looked at this slide quite a while and wonder, are there efficacy metrics that go with this as well, to say that with our level of firefighters, we lost so much property to fire, or there were so many complications versus
Right.
20.6 in Green Bay, how they covered their city?
Sure. Great question. That's a super tough thing to measure. And when I came here, I also noticed that was one of the things that we struggle with to measure, just like my previous department. How do you measure fire loss? So there are categories when you fill out a report as a firefighter after a fire about property loss. But it's very tough to train a firefighter to walk into a building that's burned and say, well, how much do you think this house was worth, or their contents were worth, and how much was lost? So I don't place much stock in that data. So honestly, I didn't look at it. It's challenging. It gets reported to the federal government. It's not something that every department routinely publishes, because I think every fire chief struggles with the accuracy of that data. So we did not look at that. We did look at other comparable things, or things that we think you would compare in a peer department. So first and foremost, in my mind, is, well, which one of these run an ambulance service? Because if you are a fire department that runs an ambulance service, by nature, you just need more full-time employees, because you need that many more bodies to staff the ambulance. So we don't run the ambulance here, like we talked about earlier, so we have fewer firefighters. But on this list, none of these have an ambulance service, with the exception of Green Bay. So their number is higher, because they also have to staff, I don't know how many ambulances they have a day, maybe 10 a day, right? Which is 20 more full-time employees per day times 3 shifts. That's 60 more people they would need to provide their ambulance service. But the rest of these are standalone fire departments. They are not EMS departments. And the other thing we looked at is number of high-rises in all their communities. So just going down the list, this is, Chris, I guess, how did you determine the number of high-rises? Just a simple Google search and try to figure it out? Annual reports. So Green Bay, as best we can tell, is 0. Peoria, Illinois, 12. Duluth, 6. Columbia, 4. Sioux Falls, 12. Fargo, 10. Cedar Rapids, 16. And then we're north of 30. So we have a much higher risk than these other communities do, but far fewer firefighters.
Number?
30.
I think Chris has 31 listed on this. I thought I had 35 based on another document I looked at, but north of 30.
Councilmember Miller.
So earlier in the presentation, you brought up population density, area of the city. I'm curious how these cities might compare in that measure, square miles, how many fire stations they have per those square miles, how many engine companies, to look at that efficiency of resource as well and distribution.
Well, that's a great question. We did not do that in preparation for this, but I see DC Ferguson making notes as well, so we can follow up with you on that one as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead.
All right, so now we're going to jump into some data from Fitch regarding national benchmarks. So we're going to talk a little bit about the NFPA. And I know everybody's baseline knowledge is a little bit different. So the NFPA, that's the National Fire Protection Agency. They set the industry standards for the fire service. So they're a nonprofit organization, been around since 1896, and they develop consensus standards related to fire protection, electrical safety, emergency services, building construction, hazardous materials, and other life safety aspects. They're not a government agency. Their standards are not law unless they're adopted by a state or municipality to be the law. Like in Wisconsin, we adopt many NFPA standards to be our law. Not so much here in Minnesota. But they do publish over 300 different standard books, usually the size of a phone book, very detailed about different topics of fire and life safety. So they published a standard called 1710. That is the standard for the organization and deployment of fire suppression operations, emergency medical operations, and special operations to the public by career fire departments. So it's a standard specific for cities that have career fire departments, like we do, and gives you what the industry best standard is for how many firefighters should you have, how many different fire apparatus should you have, and how long should it take those apparatus to get to the scene of different emergency types. So we're going to talk here mainly about from the time the 911 phone rings until the time the first fire engine gets on scene. So there are numerous standards that are published in 1710 about that. The first one is the alarm answering time. So from the time you call 911 and the phone rings in the dispatch center until it's answered, there is a standard on that. That standard is that phone should be picked up within 15 seconds, 95% of the time, and then within 40 seconds, 99% of the time. After that happens, once the phone is answered, that is now we're in the area called alarm processing. So that's how long it takes the dispatcher to ask appropriate questions and figure out what unit should be going to that call. That standard is 64 seconds, 95% of the time, and then 106 seconds, 99% of the time. Then for these benchmarks, the dispatchers are done, and now it's up to the firefighters, and now we're talking about turnout time. So from the time the dispatchers call us and tell us there's a call until the time we get our butts from the firehouse into the fire engine and start driving, we should be able to do that within 1 minute and 20 seconds, within 80 seconds or 1 minute and 20 seconds, 90% of the time. Then getting that first engine on scene should happen within 4 minutes, 90% of the time. That's what's called travel time. So from the time we start driving until the time that first engine gets there. There's a standard for the second due engine that we're not going to get into today. And then there's what's known as the ERF, and we'll talk a bit about that later, but that's your effective response force. That's for getting all of the required units to properly mitigate that emergency, to get all those units and personnel on scene within 8 minutes, 90% of the time. And I know it's a lot, so I will kind of harken back to that after we talk about where our city performs for these benchmarks. So first of all, for the alarm answering time, so the time the dispatcher answers the phone, our city does not track that time right now. That's a problem. If anything ever goes bad, these are the sorts of standards that lawyers are going to be grilling me and the city administrator and the mayor about on the stand. And the fact that we don't track how long it takes to answer the 911 phone is a concern. So I don't have an answer for you, and there's no column on the sheet for that because it's not something that Fitch could track for us. The second thing we'll talk about is call processing time. This is an important one. So how long it takes the dispatcher to figure out what units should be going to that emergency. Again, the standard is 64 seconds. For EMS calls, we're at 6.5 minutes, like 10 times the national standard. Now, that's a little deceiving. We'll talk about that in a second. But on the fire side, it's 2.5 minutes, so it's almost 2.5 times the national standard for them to figure out which rigs should be getting sent to that call. So we'll go back to the EMS side of things here. So this goes back to that nuanced relationship we have with our private ambulance partner. The fact that we answer the 911 call in this building, that takes time. And then we put them on hold, that takes time. Then we transfer that call over to Mayo, that transfer takes time. And then Mayo picks it up from there and runs them through that algorithm. We don't have access to Mayo's data. So it's very possible for many of these calls that there's an ambulance getting dispatched and they've got a call for service code already created, but we don't capture that here. So that can be a bit deceiving, the 6.5 minutes. We are confident that the fire time, the 2.5 minutes, is 100% accurate. And it stands to reason that, well, if we could dispatch fire apparatus in 2.5 minutes, we could probably dispatch EMS in about 2.5 minutes as well. So it's much better than 6.5 minutes, but it's still 2.5 times the national standard. That's a concern. So that's where we are with call processing time. The next column over is dispatch time. That's call processing plus how long does it actually take the dispatcher to get on the radio and do the talking and push the buttons to make sure the rigs are notified. So there we're talking tenths of a minute, so we're talking another 15 or 20 seconds added. That's reasonable. The next category we're looking at is the turnout time. Again, national standard here for fire is 1 minute and 20 seconds. You see that we are 2.8, 2.7 minutes, so double the national standard. That's a concern as well. There are a couple of factors that can play into this. One is what we call unit drawdown. So in a city like ours where we're fairly busy, I use a fictional example here. Let's say engine 3 is on a call. Maybe they're on a car accident somewhere. They're attending that car accident, and another call comes in engine 3's territory. The engine 3 officer hears that on his radio. He's got a decision to make. Do I clear from this call and respond to the second emergency? Maybe I'm getting close to the end of finishing up with this car accident. Or do I let another fire engine, say engine 4, come from further away and respond to that call? Neither one is right or wrong, but you have to make a decision in the moment. So if you decide that it's gonna be one more minute here and my crew will be done at the car accident, all right, we're gonna wait the minute and we're gonna take that call. Well, that makes your turnout time longer. And because we have a lot of concurrent calls in this community, that happens very often. The other factor that plays into this is station design. All of our stations are relatively new and they're really, really nice, and we thank you for that. But the problem when you build really, really big, fancy, nice stations is it takes a lot longer to get from one side of that station to the other. So if I'm a firefighter at Station 2, and Station 2 is our biggest one, and maybe I'm in the workout room training, maybe I'm in a training room watching a online learning module, whatever it is, and now a call comes in, I've got to stop what I'm doing and walk all the way across the station. And that sounds silly, you're like, oh, they're just walking. But in an old school fire station that's maybe a third of that size, you're walking 2/3 faster, you're getting to your rig quicker. But now, because we've made decisions to build really big, fancy stations, again, thank you, it takes longer for us to get to our apparatus. Everything ebbs and flows in the fire service. This is a trend nationwide. So if you go to a station design conference right now, the big emphasis is on how do we maximize that turnout time and get them there faster. So there are many station design tricks that you can use to get new stations and have faster turnout times. So when we build Station 6, we will take that into account for sure. But our other 5 stations that are already built, they kind of are what they are. It's going to take us a while to get from one side of the building to the other. There are some cultural issues there as well. I will not dispute that. And we have shared this information with our crews as well, and firefighters are competitive, and I don't think any of them are comfortable with knowing that their turnout time is double the national average.
Councilmember Miller.
So I'm just trying to understand this chart or this table compared with your last slide. Do any of these at any of the stages meet the national standard there, or I don't, these are additive across.
Well, yes and no.
Sometimes it looks like.
So, well, I'll speak to the math first, because I had the same first question, right? So you would think that, well, call processing and dispatch time are additive together.
Right.
Right. But beyond that, then I would think you would, if you add 6.7 to 2.7 to 6.4, that you get the total response time. That's not the case, because these are 90th percentiles. So it's each one of these categories, the 90th percentile of them.
Okay.
So they're not always indicative of the same incident.
Okay.
And the same thing going down to the totals.
Is there a way to create a version of this table with a reference row of what 90th percentile or national standard would be for that category?
Like comparing where we are
So
with the
looking
previous
at
slide.
NFPA 1710 as you presented before.
Right. Like cross-referencing the previous slide with this slide.
Yes.
We can get that to you as well.
Okay.
But to answer your first question, do we meet any of the national standards relative to these first steps of the 911 incident? No.
Where would we be closest?
We would probably be closest on, we're quite a bit off in all of them. Probably closest on travel time, which we'll talk about next.
Okay.
So travel time, the national standard, so this is once all the firefighters are in the truck and they're driving to the emergency, 4 minutes, 90% of the time. You can see here between fire and EMS, we're 5.8 and 6.4 minutes. But that's truly a policy decision. So going through some older annual reports and strategic plans, back in 1993, your predecessors adopted a 3-minute travel time standard for their city. That's 1 minute faster than the national standard. The fire chief at the time, back in the 90s, told them that we can't meet this. It's not realistic unless you want to build tons more firehouses. And at that point, it was more than 10 firehouses for the city. The 1993 footprint of the city, which is much smaller. So obviously that never came to fruition. But this council still held them to the 3-minute standard, which they couldn't meet. Again, it was reaffirmed in 1996. That's the standard. And finally, at some point after 96, the fire chief was able to convince them to adopt the current national standard of 4 minutes. But that was before, when we had a much smaller city footprint. Councils before you, but after that, made decisions to move Station 2 further out. Station 2 used to be right over here on Silver Lake, and now it's up the hill on Iola Road. Station 3 used to be much closer to the center of the city. Station 4 used to be closer. There was no Station 5. But previous councils and fire chiefs made policy decisions to say, we're comfortable moving stations out further. Well, that creates longer travel time. And that's fine, because if you're comfortable with the level of service that you're getting for travel, once again, there are no national standards police. We're not going to get arrested for this. But those are the policies. That's the result of those policy decisions.
Councilmember Miller.
As a follow-up to this, since you mentioned time, can you talk to how these are trending over time? Are they staying about the same level? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse?
So that's a great question as well. And that goes back to the problems of this organization not routinely tracking its data consistently, and back to why we brought in Fitch and Associates to help us draft a standard of cover. So a standard of cover is a tremendous amount of work to draft the first one. Once you do it, and I have this talk with my peer fire chiefs all the time that go through an accreditation process, you better do it every year, because it's far easier just to build off the previous years and update numbers so you can watch your own trends versus building one, say, every 10 years, because it's like reinventing the wheel every time. So we'll go through the work with Fitch. This will be,
So this is a new
plus $1 million
baseline. We don't have a comparable set of data from.
We don't.
Okay.
I could probably pull you something from the 90s, like some of the previous chiefs were pretty good about this sorts of stuff, but in the past 20 years, not so much.
Thank you. So Chief, if you can kind of, we're at almost the hour point. I do see Councilmember Palmer there. So we're asking a lot of questions. We want to kind of let you get to your asks. And also, while these numbers are very important to us to see and to understand, it's also, we want to know what your recommended solutions to the problems that you think are critical for us to focus on. So with that, Councilmember Palmer.
Thank you. Only have a couple. But the decision was made by the fire department to move the stations out so that it's easier to come into town. That was the rationale that I remember on that. The stations were designed by the fire department. It wasn't designed by us. So if they're too big, then it's not really our fault that they're too big. And to me, the national standard that you look at, isn't it the ICO or the insurance rating? And didn't it go improve for us last year that our insurance rating went up? So if that's really the gold standard, the other standards, I'm not sure if they even matter.
Sure. So what you're speaking of is the ISO, the insurance office rating. So every city is given a rating by the ISO. It's on I think it's a 5-year cycle. So in our last reevaluation by ISO, we went from a rating of a 3, so the higher the number, the worse the performance, I guess I would say. We went from a 3, which is a solid rating, to a 2, which is a better rating. We made it past the threshold into a 2 by like tenths of a point, so we're right there. I would say almost at risk of sliding back to a 3. What the ISO rating does is it's an indicator of performance, but for the private sector. So commercial insurance companies use your ISO rating to help determine commercial insurance rates in your city. So for single family homeowner, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. But if you own a business in the city, the better the city's ISO rating, the lower your insurance rate may be if your company subscribes to ISO. And it's not just fire department performance, but it's indicative of the water utility and dispatch as well. So it's a multi-pronged rating of different services that your city provides.
Let's continue.
All right. Since we're strapped for time, real quick, effective response force. This is also defined in NFPA 1710. 4 key categories, but there are numerous other ones. But single family home, that's our bread and butter fire. That's where we live. NFPA 1710 recommends 17 firefighters respond to a single family home fire. We can meet that now because we employ 26 firefighters a day. So single family homes we're great at. But going back to being at risk for only handling one incident at a time. We can only handle one single-family home, like 1.5, but you never have a half a fire, right? But then other categories that look at are open-air strip malls. We've got a ton of these in our city. The recommended effective response force for that is 28 firefighters. We can't meet that at any one day of the week because we only employ 26 a day here. Same with garden-style apartments, and we're building more of these. Is 28 firefighters is the recommended number. We have 26 a day. And then high-rise, this is where we kind of hung our hat on our last SAFER grant. This is what really scared me as the new fire chief when I walked in the door, is you need 43 firefighters to effectively fight a high-rise fire, and we only employ 20, at that point, 25 a day. So we'll talk about that a little more here in a second. So where we sit today, effective response force, we're in partial alignment with the national standards. We can meet the single-family home one. Ladder truck staffing, we're below the national standard. Command staffing, we're improved now that we have a second battalion chief every day. Daily staffing, we're below that benchmark because, again, every day we don't have enough firefighters to respond and effectively fight a strip mall fire or a garden-style apartment fire or a high-rise fire. And response time, we just talked quite a bit about that. We are not in alignment with the national response time standards. Efforts we've taken to fix this so far, the administrative restructuring and the addition of that additional shift commander a day. So again, taking folks out of this building on 8-hour shift and putting them back where they're needed in the firehouses, protecting our citizens. The improved data collection and metrics, now having a better understanding of where we rank compared to those national standards, and then continuous improvement in the dispatch center. So that'll lead us to our upcoming, or preview of our upcoming ask for the SAFER grant. So as a refresher, SAFER stands for the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response. The purpose of the SAFER grant is to provide funding to fire departments to increase the number of firefighters. That's a key thing. It can't be used to hire EMTs or paramedics only. It has to be firefighters. It can't be used to hire fire marshals or fire inspectors. It has to be firefighters. And to help communities meet industry minimum standards. So those are the standards we just talked about, those ERFs and those response times. So we're not meeting most of those now. The point of SAFER is to help us meet those. So last year when we met, again, this came out short notice. I was new as the fire chief and the federal government was shut down at the time. Normally there's a few months leeway on these sorts of things. Last year there was a few weeks leeway. This year is not much different. This came out about 3 weeks ago, the announcement, and it closes in a couple of weeks. This slide, just to show you that this is not a novel thing that we just kind of stumbled across or even are making up. There are numerous cities across Minnesota that apply for year after year and receive SAFER grants for millions of dollars. So a list of those, many of those I would probably call peer communities that are getting numerous firefighters paid for in part by the federal government. So some of our current staffing challenges, again, back to our ladder trucks.
Mayor Norton?
Yeah, with the grant, I mean, this is one of the things that we ask all the time of our grants. Is this a one-time grant that gets people hired? Or how long does the grant go? Because we will have to pick up the tab after the first year, or fifth year, or whatever year.
Correct. Yep, we got that at the end, so for the sake of time, if we can wait till I get to the last slide. Cool, thank you. Ladder truck staffing is currently behind the recommended standards. Also some current limitations with our staffing, and it's how we respond to fire and EMS calls. And then increased strain on our fire engines downtown because there's just a higher number of fire calls and EMS calls that originate downtown. So some reluctancy to move a fire engine out of downtown until we know we're doing our diligence to reduce the number of calls that they're going on. So last year, our SAFER request was for an additional 8 firefighters total. That was shot down. That was not accepted by the feds. In large part, I think, because we really focused in on the high-rise fire ERF. So the feds are looking for grants that help communities meet those ERF standards. And we really focused in on high-rise because things were relatively rushed. So we want to reimagine it this year. We want to ask for more firefighters. So we want a total of 15 additional firefighters. But what that would do would put 5 more on each shift, and that would enable us to do 3 things. Meet the effective response force for the garden-style apartments that we talked about earlier, that we're building more of. Meet the effective response force on the strip mall fires. And then we'd have just enough firefighters to basically respond to 2 simultaneous single-family home fires, which does happen occasionally. It's happened twice since I've been here in our city. But we don't have enough firefighters now to effectively do that. So our ask would be to hire 15 through the SAFER grant. With the grant, and these change year after year, but the last 2 years have been consistent. The grant will fund 75% of a first-year firefighter salary and benefit package for the first 2 years, and then 35% of that salary and benefit package for the third year. Once the grant is over in the 4th year, there are 4 options that the feds outlined. One is to incorporate those positions into the general fund, into the tax levy. That would be our recommendation. Another option would be to reapply for another SAFER grant. There is a city on that slide, I think it's Bloomington. Bloomington does that. So last year they got almost $7 million, and again, the year prior they got $7 million for SAFER. That's the only department I've ever seen be successful in applying for subsequent SAFER grants for the same position, but it is an option.
I mean, just for clarity, Bloomington went from a combined department to be a full-time department just recently, and they have the Mall of America. So we're doing okay.
Yes. We could also absorb those positions through attrition, basically going back to pre-grant staffing levels as folks retire from the fire department. I would not recommend that, but that is a tool that you would have. Or the last option, the most drastic, would be to simply that 4th year reduce staffing to the pre-grant levels and lay those people off. I would also not recommend that. For the sake of time, I won't get into the impacts, but obviously firefighter safety, having more firefighters available for our citizens, reducing overtime pressure, aligning with industry best practices. But here's kind of what the dollars look like. So loaded salary and benefits for a first-year firefighter right now comes to just under $135,000. That's with their retirement and the health insurance and everything else. So 15 positions over 3 years means a total outlay of $6.2 million. The feds would cover 3.7 of that, leaving the city to cover 2.5 million of that over the 3-year grant period. So it's roughly 60% of the grant that the feds would pick up. The 4th year, the tax levy impact, if you were to go that option, would be $2.4 million a year in the perpetuity. I think there are some other options we can look at as far as maybe coming to you with proposals for like fee-for-service type things that we can help offset some of that cost, charging for numerous false fire alarms. Say we go to a place, 3rd and subsequent false fire alarm in a calendar year, we could bill back for those expenses. Lift assists, we've got numerous facilities in our city that rely on the fire department to lift patients off of the floor of, say, a nursing home. Lift assists actually account for, is it 20%? Sorry, 10% of our overall run volume in this organization. That's crazy. Now we have a ton of nursing homes here, but their staff very frequently don't lift patients off the floor. They call us to do that. So if we could bill them for that service, that would help offset some of these costs. There are cities that bill for car accident responses and things like that. So we could get creative and come back in a future study session if there was an appetite. Now, we're not talking millions of dollars of revenue, but probably hundreds of thousands of dollars that might offset some of that 2.4. Just a snapshot of the timetable here. So again, this was an article that got published on May 18th saying SAFER grant opens May 19th because of the federal shutdown, and applications are due by June 22nd. So we're likely to come back to you based on the feedback here, at least next week, for a request to apply. If once the application is in, the feds have to make a decision no later than September 30th. We would come back to you if we were selected with the permission to accept that. We have got 30 days for that acceptance. Once accepted, the city gets 180 days to complete the recruitment and hiring, which means these folks wouldn't hit the street until spring of next year, and that starts the beginning of the 36-month grant period. How this would align with city foundational principles, I won't read those to you. You can read them yourself. And I believe that is the last slide, but I'll save any.
So Chief, I'll start with a question. So when you came to us last year, it was 7, and granted, I heard you say that was focused on the high rise, but now you're coming with 15. So what was the change besides the high rise? What got you from 7 to 15?
Right. So because our grant wasn't accepted, we're making the assumption that it wasn't accepted because we could not paint the picture as to how that, it was actually 8, but how those additional 8 firefighters would get us in line with industry best standards, because 8 still is far short of where we need to be for those effective response force numbers that the grant reviewer is going to be looking at. But 15 then checks the box for being able to adequately respond to the open air strip mall fires and the garden style apartment fires, and that's a big risk in our city. Still doesn't check the box for the high rise, and we're fine with that. But if we tweak our narrative to really focus in on the garden style apartments and the strip mall risks in the city, we feel we have a much better opportunity to get our grant selected.
So with the 15, how does that align with the opening of Station 6 and the staffing that you're looking at when that
Right.
opens?
So when Station 6 opens, we've got 2 options. One is to hire all new firefighters to staff that station, or to shunt existing resources that we have in our city out to Station 6. So if we hire 15, we can retain a portion of those to bolster our ladder truck staffing. So right now we have 3 firefighters on a ladder truck, and you can't split a crew of 3 because you work in pairs. You're working in an environment of toxic gases that's completely black where you can't see. We can't send 1 person into that environment. That's not allowed. You have to have at least 2. Well, I can't split 3 firefighters into 2 crews. But if I put an additional firefighter every day onto each of our ladder trucks, now I've got 4 people on that truck, and I can split them into 2 crews, and they can go out and do different things. So I'm much more comfortable taking an engine from Station 1 and moving it to Station 6 when it opens, if I've got enough firefighters on my ladder truck that's already at Station 1 to say, well, you can do the work of 2 crews now because I've got 4 of you on a truck.
So one last question. So at the outset, you talked about the travel time, and you said that and you illustrated this, we don't meet the best in-class travel time with the 5 stations, but that we would with 6.
Well, we do better with 6 because now we're serving that portion of the city that's
Do we do
waiting.
better across the city or just in that quadrant?
A little bit of both. So definitely in that quadrant, right? Because right now, the few homes that are there are waiting 15 minutes for us to drive there. Like it's that isolated. But also then we're going to decrease on unit drawdown, right? So now, right now, if somebody calls there, they're either getting engine 3 or engine 4 to respond there, leaving engine 3 and engine 4's territories empty. And now somebody calls for 911 in engine 3 or 4's territory, they're waiting for somebody else longer away in the city to come. So the wider you can spread your resources, the more often you're going to not have that unit drawdown where one unit is responding into the territory of another.
Okay. Mayor Norton?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far afield from the discussion of staffing here, but I just spent several hours at a conference yesterday, and we were with the firefighters folks, and one of the issues that they talked about that's in crisis mode right now has to do more with the expenses of purchasing equipment. 3 and 4 year waits for them. There's a monopoly which is impacting the ability to purchase that needs to be broken up. But with everything you're talking about, particularly if you're talking about adding a new station, or if you have equipment that's getting aged, how are you weighing those needs with what you're talking about here, which is adding 15 people?
Right. So the equipment you're talking about, the delays are really on the apparatus side, so new fire engines. So years ago, pre-COVID, to build a fire engine took 9 months. That's what it took, always without fail. Now it's multiple years. You place your order and you wait. So our city just took ownership of a new engine that was ordered, I don't know how many years ago. 4? 4 years we waited to get that engine. So the good thing with adding staff and then redeploying the engine from Station 1 is we're not proposing adding any apparatus to the fleet. We already have 2 fire engines at Station 1 because of the workload, but if we put additional firefighters on the ladder truck that's down there, we can split them into 2 on emergency scenes, redeploying an engine and crew that are already there out to Station 3. So we wouldn't be coming back to you and asking for an additional engine to add to the fleet.
And I guess my question is that true of all your fire engines? Because what I'm hearing and what we discussed was that across the country, fire engines are failing. and you can't even get parts. I mean, it's getting that critical. So, we have 6 or 7 fire stations, and we think about adding another one. What does the whole fleet look like? And again, you have to balance that on where you're going to spend your money, and is it staffing or is it fleet?
Right, no, absolutely. And I'd say our fleet overall is in really good shape. You have been very supportive, and I think we've got a pretty robust admin staff that stays on top of those. Our mechanic is great. So we're comfortable with where our fleet is. We did, as a cost-saving measure, recently just buy a used ladder truck as a reserve. So our oldest ladder truck serves as our reserve. So we've got 2 frontline, 1 ladder truck as the reserve. So like if they go in for an oil change and they pop a tire, they jump in their reserve ladder truck. But that reserve ladder truck was failing to the point where it was not economic to upkeep it anymore. So our staff went out and found on the East Coast a used ladder truck that was newer than our reserve ladder truck and got it for pennies on the dollars and drove it back here. And we're currently upfitting that to be our reserve engine, but a far more economical solution than going out and buying a $3 or $4 million brand new ladder truck to serve as the reserve, because that would not be fiscally responsible.
Councilmember Miller.
Sure. I have 3 hopefully quick questions. For this list of other Minnesota communities awarded, is there any indication in the amount of how many firefighters that relates to? Is there a formula that you can put in and say, this community received award for 10, this community for 6, this community for 20?
That's a great question. I don't believe that's published data.
Or have you done any outreach to these departments to ask what was in their application for these that were successful?
I have not, but I would say that if we took that 135 figure for loaded salary and benefits, that's probably pretty close to across the state what a firefighter costs, because insurance costs roughly what insurance costs. I mean, there's some small nuance, but we could reverse engineer that and come to a pretty close number.
My second question is, if we were to authorize you to move forward and the SAFER grant were awarded, what data would you collect, or how would we measure success when we think about post-staffing models?
Right. I think first and foremost is getting that first standard of cover document published and really laying out what are our baselines. Where is the council comfortable with certain benchmarks? Are we comfortable with that 6-minute travel time? Are we comfortable with a 1.5-minute turnout time, or 2-minute turnout time? Are we comfortable with some of those dispatch times, or do we want to improve those? And I would hope the goal should be to continually improve all. We can invest in policy changes and organizational changes that impact many of those, except for travel time. That really is, where are your firehouses relative to where is the demand?
Okay. And then when would the standards of cover document be complete? Would it be likely to come by the time that there would be an award decision for the SAFER grant, or?
We're hoping later this year. So yeah,
Okay.
If the award is going to be late September, probably right around the same time.
Okay. I'll say I feel comfortable, supporting application for this. I think we have more to talk about, and we're obviously over the first hour, but clearly more to talk about in the fire operations and help us feel comfortable with some of the policy areas. But I think at this point, I would express support for application of this program.
I appreciate that.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, again, I do appreciate kind of going through this, a very operational look at what happens, and frankly, I appreciate your openness of the things that we need to improve. My own observation is that our operational efficiency, as viewed across a couple of years in the city and looking at different events that happen, seems to be much better than when we compare it to standards. That we seem to have better results than what we should get with the way we're not following up on standards. And I'm not sure if that there's a real operational reason for that. I think it's not lost on me that more of our incidents are in the older part in the city center, and all of and then when we do coverage models, we move the stations out to get closer to where the populations are. It almost feels like we're in the wrong direction. As far as, supporting the request for 15 additional, which is a huge raise on a thing like this, and talking about, I read it as a $6 million hit for one specific service that would probably drive at least a 6% impact on the levy. That it makes I'm not ready.
I just want to clarify something. The annual cost is $2.4 million. So
Yeah, I heard that, but I thought that, and again, I did my math wrong, because I heard 2.5, but I also saw that we're being covered upfront with
was a-
federal, but that goes away after 2
Right.
years.
So the way the math was on that slide was showing you the 3-year cost, and the actual 4th year where you're absorbing it all is the 2.4 million. and what- I just wanna
15%
make sure-
growth in a department that I think you have about in the range of 110 firefighters right now. It just feels, and if I had a very specific problem that I knew I was addressing, but just to chase these standards, I'm not there yet.
So that's a valid point.
Other thoughts?
And I would just note that we do plan to have this on reports and recommendations on the 15th, not on consent, so.
Councilmember Palmer.
Just to follow up with what Mr. Keen is saying, I mean, the ISO, I mean, even make it by this much, you still make it, and so you lower their insurance rates, and as you said, it doesn't count for this, for the residential, but the residential is already covered, so I'm not sure I want to add 16 more people to the city payroll, so we'll have to think about this.
Sure.
Thank you, Chief.
I'll just leave you with a quick quote because I came across this while digging through some of this. So this is from Chief Dave Kapler, who's fire chief numerous fire chiefs ago, to the city council president back on October 28th of 1999. Starts with, and it's quote, "Like a youngster who has outgrown last year's snowsuit, Rochester is finding its current boundaries a little short in the sleeves." And this is in preparation for preparing the council to hire additional firefighters to open, at the time, new Station 5. That wasn't open.
Five, yep.
So kind of finding yourselves in the same situation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next up, we have Mayo Field update, Mr. Whitman and et al.
Good evening, Mayor, Council President, and council members. Mayo Field has served the community for many decades, and to begin with, today we're going to have Mike Nigber talk about the condition of the stadium, and he'll also address the planning for an update to the stadium that is in our current Parks and Recreation System Plan, but talk about how things have changed and circumstances have changed since that plan was adopted in 2016. From there, Ben Bolt is going to discuss how the regional sports and recreation complex will accommodate the demand for baseball, except for the Honkers, who've announced that they're leaving after the end of this season, or they're no longer going to be playing at Mayo Field. And finally, with the upcoming relocation of the Parks and Forestry Operations Center to the new facility to the new maintenance center, there's an opportunity to look at the long-term future of this area. And Irene Woodward will conclude the presentation by outlining a proposed planning process. And so we'll start out with Mike.
So as Paul talked about, there's a long history here. We've had about 120 years of ownership of the property. Oh, thank you, Ben. And over that time frame, things have changed in that property quite dramatically. There was a stadium built, that stadium went away. We had buffalo and deer there, those went away. Built a new stadium there, which is there today. We've added our park and forestry building there. Again, long time history there, long time buildings, which create their own challenges along with that. So the current stadium is built in 1946. Lighting was added in 1951, about 2,000 people capacity in there. We've got deck space, we've got stadium space, et cetera. Those are there still today. And in 1946, it was brand spanking new. 2026, not so new anymore. That's part of the challenge we've got. And in 2013, I came to Park and Rec in 2011. We knew there's some challenges going on with our facilities. Our Park and Forestry Operations building, we talked about that early on. Thank you. We're getting a new building here shortly, so it's very exciting to have. In 2013, we had a report done on the stadium itself to find out what was going on there, what are the challenges with that. ADA accessibility, the plumbing, the wiring, the stadium itself, the condition of that, rusting and kind of just falling apart in many cases. There's some costs that were assigned to that building to correct the immediate needs and then long-term issues. And in 2013, that was $770,000. So not a big chunk of money, but still a big chunk bigger than our budget at that point in time in our CIPs. Along with that, in 2013, we had a failure of some lighting, or a lighting pole. during a storm event. I said, wow, that's kind of unusual. Did some more research, brought a consultant in, and lo and behold, the same issue we had back then on that single light was affecting all of our lights. So we got a new set of lights out there, not planned for, so council funded that in that time frame. Those same issues that we have back then, except for the lighting, the stadium issues, the rusting, the cracking, the delamination of the wood, you name it, is still there today. Now, our team maintains that facility, and we do maintain it. So we change wiring, we make plumbing modifications, but that's just it. It's putting lipstick on an old building is really what that's doing. There's other terms for that, but the quality we provide to our community members, though, is our field, and that's been received several awards over the years to show our commitment to that facility. The stadium is just an old facility that you just have to deal with. So the continuing issues that we've got out there are ADA accessibility, there's still the same plumbing issues, same electrical issues, and just the overall experience of people going there and the players using that facility. Some of the pictures we've got here for you, and you've probably seen those in the packet, but again, it is just old and just worn out, and likely so that it should have been redone many years ago. And as Paul alluded to, we have a park system plan that we did in 2016 that we adopted. We talked about this, and that park system plan acknowledged the stadium needed to be updated significantly or replaced. Community input provided to us that we want a new facility out there for our community members. I'm sure that's provided by other users, whether it be soccer, the Honkers, or the Red Hawks, you name it, wanted to see a better stadium to be playing in. In our park system plan, we talked about this is a long-term vision. We had no funding applied to that. So we said, okay, what's a realistic time frame? Just like in our pool conversations. We didn't have funding for 2 pools. We said, okay, let's shoot for 1 big pool and make it really good. We had a goal for a stadium here. Well, realistically, 2030 and beyond, and not even our own money. We had to partner with people. Our goal in our park system is partners. It makes our world go round. It does a very good job for that. So again, we're looking at a partnership out in 2030, and we had no money or commitment at that point in time. Well, come along 2020, and the referendum came about, and we were successful in that endeavor, and we have $2 million a year going towards our asset preservation, enhancements, and community growth, et cetera, for that. Worked really well. We set priorities for ourselves, and we've been working towards those priorities ever since. In that prioritization, though, we said 2030 was that goal. Let's continue that along. And we've not provided CIP funding for that stadium at all, just our own operational dollars to correct those issues that come up on an annual basis. Well, around the time of 2021, 2022, someplace in that range, Honkers were meeting with us, and they kind of said, you know what, it's nice, great field to play on, but the stadium is not long for this world. We're gonna be looking elsewhere, or looking at a different facility. They had concepts developed, both at our site and other sites, to see what can happen, what can be that new vision. And in the end here, in 2026, they provide notice of termination, which is outlined in our lease agreements with them, give that option for them as well as for us. And they chose to go forward in that time frame. So where we're at today, it's a new vision. What is that going to be looking like? Right now, the property overall is about 8.75 acres. That includes the Mayo Field and our current operational site. So if you look at the yellow area, it's about 2.7 acres. Our operational area is about 2 acres of that. And again, thank you very much. We're getting a new building out there coming up shortly here in August, September. So we'll more than double that size and be very effective in that new location with our public works friends. So very exciting time for us. Mayo Field, however, that will still remain. We're looking at operating that through 2027. But at this point in time, you know, we've got high school teams there. The Honkers play there. It's about 90 games a year plus several events. So again, it's a very active site. But what happens in the future going forward?
Mr. Nagber, did you just, I thought you said that the Honkers are not going to be there in 27.
This year they are. This year they are.
In 27
they go away. Yes,
Okay.
correct. I may have misspoke. My
Yep.
apologies. So really, it's a matter of what we're looking at both for now, today, next year, and then forthcoming years. So the small area plan, we'll have Irene talk about that in just a second, but it covers a lot of small property areas, including Mayo Field. But we've got some goals for our park and rec area in this location. So we think there's about 2 to 4 acres of redevelopment space that's available, keeping some recreation space there for the community members to utilize in some fashion. What that will be, we don't know. That vision's not been developed yet. We want to keep some space along the river corridor area. Again, there's a bike trail there right now. People like the river corridor to go bike along and utilize. So again, keeping that segment there. And then what may happen with those sports groups going forward. And I'll let Ben talk about that and what that may happen.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So just briefly on the current users, they were outlined in the slide there, there are several different baseball teams that utilize the space during the course of the spring and summer. In the spring, especially, many high school teams sharing space both at Mayo Field as well as Hudson Field, Rochester Baseball Complex. And then each of the high schools has a ball field at their high school location as well. So the way we envision accommodating those additional teams and those games, those 90 games that are displayed on the screen here, would be once the new fields are ready at the Rochester Sports and Recreation Complex, those could be utilized in the spring. A lot of these games happen on weeknights when we'll have those community users there and be able to accommodate them in that way. As we've talked about before, we expect that we'll have the opportunity to host many different types of community events at the sports complex as well. So movies in the park or things like that could certainly be accommodated out there. So we think there is a way to accommodate that. Maybe the one thing I would just add to that would be it will potentially mean that the groups will need to consider how they develop their schedule in general. There are some teams who like to play on Saturdays and Sundays. We may have to modify that based on what we have for tournaments going on at the new facility when that time comes. But that would be our plan to accommodate those teams and activities.
The last thing I just mentioned is that, we've got a park system plan update coming forward here, starting at the end of the year, going in through 2027. And that update of the master plan or park system plan will help guide some of the reuses that may happen in the park space specifically, but it won't address the overall vision this piece of property may have for redevelopment. That's really where Irene's team comes in and starts talking about the small area plan. So Irene?
You want to go to the next slide? No, that's all right. So really part of this stemmed from last year. There was a study session back in July where we started to identify all of our parcels, that the city-owned parcels. There's kind of a rough map on the side that we have identified this particular parcel and these two, and then what does it start to look like if you look at this area together, and help to really look at what the future development is that. If you want to go to the next slide. We tried to start to lay out a little bit of what this would look like. This work would be led by the planning team within community development. It's kind of one of the things we've identified in the comprehensive plan is, there's these high level versions, but we've also identified the need for kind of these more small area plans of really diving in a little bit into more detail of what could happen in these different areas and help guide that future development. Along with really building off of some of the existing riverfront plans, there's been some planning work just to the south. How does this really incorporate into that? This area really we've not identified or really studied it in great detail. So what does these development opportunities look like in terms of land use, connectivity? What does that really look like? We would also envision that there would be engagement with neighborhood and stakeholders that would be led by the planning team in conjunction with probably communications kind of assisting with some of that. We also expect to kind of work with Parks, Public Works, RPU in there in terms of identifying what those needs are, what's available, what's really going to make sense in terms of what are the potential for these sites long term, and what does this area really look like within the city. And so we estimated this work to begin in the fourth quarter of 2026, and really being led by that planning team, which was something that we really envisioned as part of the comprehensive plan, is the ability to kind of take on some of these smaller ones in-house and really start to drive some of what that looks like that would be consistent with our comprehensive plan moving forward.
That's all the information we had for you to share, kind of give you a high-level overview of what we're doing right now, what the plan is going forward, and to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I'll start off with the final point. So with the small area plan, and the challenge I have with the small area plans that we have is we did one for the waterfront Ampey Kmart 6 years ago. We did the two sites that bookend the government center 4 years ago, and I don't know what we do the small area plan and then we really don't follow up and really market it, peddle it to developers and see progress on the vision that we have. It's a great vision for both, but so what do you have planned to actually do the follow-up and get those private sector partnerships kind of moving and saying, that's a good space down there, there's a good space here, there's a good space there. Now we're looking at this one.
So I think the benefit to that small area plan is really identifying like what should those, do changes need to happen within the UDC or the land use with these properties? And it also really helps provide guidance to council going forward of how should these be reused? What would make the most sense in terms of redevelopment to be able to kind of move forward and partner? Through this process, we'd be looking to engage with stakeholders, which could be developers in terms of what are they seeing. I think some of the, we've seen other planning efforts and some are with private developers, and there's that challenge of how quickly they need to move forward with different projects. There's also just the changing dynamics that are happening within Rochester in terms of development happening and growth. So this really, to me, the start of that small area plan is really identifying what should this area really start to look like as we are continuing to change and taking that into account and prepping so that you can identify those future partners of where those redevelopment opportunities are within the city parcels in this general area that we, as the city, would have control over, or the council would help guide some of those discussions and decisions later on.
Let me add just one more thing, is this piece of property, we've been talking about redevelopment of this site for about 30 years, by the way. So again, having a vision in place at least gives you a step forward towards what may happen to that site.
Thank you. Councilmember Palmer.
Whenever I've been at an event there, everybody is parked at Mayo Civic Auditorium right across the street there. Do you know how many parking spots we're losing with Sherman Associates building there?
I would have to double check and get back to you with that number.
I'm going to assume it's quite a few. And so then I look at this area here, and do I really want a parking lot that's along the river? I mean, it's a great trail, and that's wonderful and stuff. And so I'm not a particularly fan of having a parking lot there. The other inquisitive question I have is it looks like towards the east side of the property there, it's a boundary line there. Is that included in this, or is that separate?
So if you can see my cursor, there's multiple parcels that are owned by the city in this case. So our property boundary goes to this line right here, comes back around the north side of the railroad tracks, down to the river, back down. There's a sliver here where the yellow line is, and then back straight across. That's our total property, equaling about 8.75 acres.
That's the 8.7, the whole thing?
It is, yep. And I know there's some conversations about what we may have owned in the past. We have never owned these properties on the south side of the ball field.
Okay. And then my only other two questions. One is I know we have the American Legion in there, and that comes from the Mayo Civic Auditorium. And then there were some covenants that were put on when the gift was made. How do you deal with those?
So it's a great question. I mean, there's 100 years of history here, including that history of deed restrictions and the use of the agreements, things like that. We're analyzing those, and we'll make a better decision as we have time to do that. It's not immediate right now to make the decision, but we are looking at that.
Councilmember Miller.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. You said the analysis of a small area plan could start at the end of this year. How long would it take to complete that process? And if a developer came to the city and said, here's an idea we have, and you're in the middle of that process, do you say, wait? Do you bring them into the process? And how do we engage with that sort of conversation while the small area planning process is happening?
I think it could likely take 6 to 8 months. I'm giving a rough ballpark depending on some of the other work that is happening. I think if someone was coming in interested, I think there's going to be some balancing of things. It doesn't mean you stop some other things as you're doing that, or we consider multiple options when we're evaluating some of these properties. I also recognize things can change in that 6 to 8 months, and I think we can accommodate some of that or identify if there's a developer interested, what those options are, and balance those things. And I think both of those things can happen at the same time.
Okay. My second question is about some of the bullet points where it says park goal, preservation of neighborhood park space. Obviously, there's a trail there. It connects immediately to the north to Silver Lake Park with different playground amenities, a pool, green fields, etc. Just south, you can immediately connect to a playground at Mayo Park on both sides of the river. At our last study session, we talked about trail funding, covering gaps, giving people access to the park system as a whole. I'm curious, why would neighborhood park space need to be preserved here when there is immediate access and we have other needs in the park system that we don't have funding sources for? I'm curious how those goals balance out here. And what would you mean by preservation of neighborhood park space here?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, when I look at this piece of property, it's right downtown. It's big and open. There's no trees blocking the way. Not being, you can't really look at that other spaces that say, here's a big open space to go play in. Silver Lake you do in a couple spots. Mayo Park, you cross the street, you do not have that. It's all full of trees. So again, how you play in the space does make an impact. So again, being selective.
What is it, like a 10-minute walk to Silver Lake from here? I mean, it feels quite close.
I think that, again, you raise a valid point. The question, though, is as a person who's lived in this area and had access to green space for a long, long time, losing that green space right now, what would they say about that? And that green space, by the way, right, that's available, has been used by community gardens and just open space and youth space right now. And it's not a very big space at all, but it is still available. And again, losing all that, I think, is a harm to the community members. Now, again, that's a debate. But again, how you incorporate that space with a development, I think it's very easy to do.
Sure.
So I think that layout is the key to this function. And again, the trail connectivity is big, but again, offsetting what's in the neighborhood already is the question.
Okay.
Mayor Norton.
Yeah, I'm a little frustrated by the conversation here, and I have to say I get frustrated by, we've been talking about this for 30 years. The city has changed drastically in 30 years. So what we talked about then and what we need to do now are completely different. And I'll just push back a little bit on the small area plan issue. Since I've been mayor, we have created several small area plans. They've sat on the table, no one's developed, no one's interested. And we spent a lot on consultants to do that work. And some of them have been done, and then right across the street, we said we want some apartments here, and then right across the street, a huge high-rise goes up with 145 apartments. Maybe we don't need that there anymore. And so I'm hesitant to continue to do plans for something that we may or may not need in the future, and would like to see us do a little bit more dreaming about what could be there. We've been approached by several folks who have ideas about things that we know the community wants and needs, but we say, well, we already have a small area plan, it can't go there. And I don't want us to continue to be in that position where we have small area plans because of something that happened 30 years ago that maybe isn't relevant, or even 7 years ago that isn't relevant anymore. And we're not opening the space up for creative development by people who are ready to do things like now or in the next few years. And I feel like we're spending a lot on consultants for things that maybe could wait, or we could put it on the market, or we could look for something that we want and say, is there anyone interested in building something here, and do those P3s. So I'm very leery about this, partly because of what I've seen on these other small area plans, which have been built during my time as mayor, and they're still empty and ugly and nothing's happening on them. So I'm just frustrated.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that. And I think sometimes with small area plans, it's also setting that vision for those areas. And so sometimes, things do change and you kind of adapt. And I think part of what this is doing for this area is setting that vision. What are some of that feedback, and how do you start to accommodate all of those different things? I think it's also building off of the work that was done in the comprehensive plan in terms of some of those priorities, and really starting to focus in on this area in terms of like, what are those big opportunities that can be done, and how do we build off of the other planning efforts? And I will just note for this, we're really just focused on using our existing staff to do it within planning department. So in terms of any professional services, it would probably be very minor. We're not looking to hire a consultant to do all of this work. And that is something we kind of identified within the comp plan as an opportunity for us to kind of like pilot and do some of these, because we recognize some of these areas are going to happen where there's available property, and how do we best utilize them going forward.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work and the creativity that the community development team does on all of these small area plans. I think the piece from my perspective that's missing is that it isn't community development, it's that economic development handoff that should happen once you complete a small area plan. And I don't know where that handoff happens. Obviously, we have Ready here in this community, and there are other opportunities, but I guess holistically to the city administration is, we have to think about where those handoffs are as far as economic development and make sure we follow through with that. And I knew somebody would be able to speak to this. Mr. Yetzer, go ahead.
Thanks, Council President. If I can chime in here really quick, I think you're asking the right questions around economic development. And I think that's a whole nother conversation that we should have. I just also want to just make the note that I want to caution that just because we're not seeing the like say downtown waterfront small area plan on a study session monthly or yearly, that it's not being used. We speak with that developer very frequently, and that plan is absolutely guiding the conversations that are happening there. But for that, we would be floundering a bit on how to guide those conversations. I also think oftentimes those developments come and we hear things like, well, how come the community didn't have a chance to weigh in on what they would like to see in this area and those sorts of things? And that's the opportunity that small area plan allowed us to do, to then help have those conversations. I know you're very familiar with that process and how the community was involved. So I just want to note that just because it's not being used or talked about at regular council meetings, that it means it's not being used, because the team does use them still.
And we don't own all of this property. So 60 acres of the Empey site is owned entirely by one person who's going through GDP, and that's what Mr. Yetzer is referencing. But we did utilize that in order to encourage the federal government to help support 6th Street Bridge access and all of the other road improvements, which then is part of the economic development to encourage there to be additional development there. But we also don't have sewer capacity for that entire site. So a lot of challenges to struggle through when we have those infill projects. And I'm not aware of development that has approached one of those that we haven't at least considered. But if many of those folks also come forward not with all of their financing lined up.
Councilmember Wall.
You know, I really hardly know what to say in this discussion. I think that I have spent more time at Mayo Field than almost everybody here. Many of them enjoyable hours, some of them really bad hours, like counting 30 minutes after a lightning strike, or waiting 2.5 hours to sing the national anthem, or, you know, it's really been a great ball field, and it's too late in 2026. We've kind of missed the boat for 40 and 50 years to continue to update that stadium so that we can be proud of that. I go to lots of stadiums across the region, many of them in the Twin Cities. And boy, Mayo Field I think that probably what some of the community needs to hear, I've seen at least one letter to the editor, I think that somebody probably here has to say, this will never be a ball stadium again.
Thank you, Councilmember.
No, I'm not done.
Okay.
I think we need to put that on the table for the community to say, this will just never be a ball stadium. I'm not hearing anybody affirm that.
Well, I think if I may,
Yeah,
I would
please.
say that our park system plan has not identified a new ball stadium other than this field right here. And because it was identified before the Honkers have said, we don't want to participate in this future process, that plan, part of the plan is really no longer valid. So our next iteration of the park system update would probably say, you know what? There's no bigger ball field here needed because there's no bigger players here. We've got the new Southeast Complex that has already said we can absorb those other players. Again, why would we have something else in addition to that? It's not a no, but it's not a yes either.
I'm going to hear yes in that you're affirming that will not be a ball field. The South Sports Complex will be of such value that I think that our especially local high school teams will find great honor in playing there. And I really believe that a community of our size needs to provide a place whereby our especially high school ball teams can be very proud of where they're playing. The Royals, Honkers is a different thing since they need a stadium to be sure. You know, this is such a beautiful spot in Rochester. It kind of reminds me of CHS Field in St. Paul, where you shoehorn a stadium, kind of in the middle of a neighborhood, and you can't believe that they actually play baseball in this place. I mean, it is. I've sat there thousands of hours. I really believe that's true, and look at the skyline, and wow, this is a jewel that we need to do very, very well with. I'll be done now, but I got lots of emotions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Very well said. Any other thoughts on Councilmember Keen? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
again, I've struggled with this too, and it's consistent where we have areas where we have our park system, and then we have like amenities that are maybe sports related, but they're really more economic development or other things that are off to the side of parks, similar to a volleyball thing. I think of this ballpark, I don't think of it as a park the way I think of neighborhood parks or regional parks. This is not really for other people to come to. This is where people go for entertainment. I know that plenty of families love to go. This is an evening event or a weekend event to go see the semi-pro level ball or the entertainment they do there. But I find that those are very difficult things to fund. Like when you talk about the sports or the parks referendum, I can see how it gets on the list, and I can see how it never moves up the list because it just doesn't have that sort of backing. And as far as partners, I mean, these other groups that are out there think we're the partners, that we're going to be doing this investing. So I don't know how this is going to work. And I have thought about, I think one of the reasons when we did the whole moving the park headquarters to Northeast was this idea of getting this development opportunity there. And if it ended up being a paved over parking lot, we've totally missed the boat on what we were trying to do. I actually appreciate the fact that when we had money over the last 20 years, we kept the field itself in really good shape. The field itself has a good reputation as a really good playing field, good lines of sight, good lighting, things like that. And I think that's money well spent. But clearly we've let everything else run down. And it's not a soft, like, here's how you fix it. The one part of input I've gotten, I'll share with my peers and the staff here, is like, we'd love you to fix this up, but please don't do it to the extent that it costs me $17 to get in. Like, don't fix it up to the point that I can't afford to go anymore. And I think that's important here too when we look at this trade-off. I'm kind of sad when we were doing the sports complex that we didn't look at one of the fields having room for 1,000 seats or outfield seating or something, so that we could have potentially looked in the future as an option for this. I agree with Councilmember Wall that I'm kind of looking here and saying, like, we've got this beautiful field there, and until things start developing there, we can continue to use it, but I don't see it as the long-term solution.
Thank you.
I don't know if you guys want to
The only thing I'll say is the quality of field we're providing out southeast, is really from a standpoint of operational, much more efficient being out there, much more cost effective, and it's a great quality field. People are expecting to play on synthetic turf nowadays than regular grasses. They still appreciate grass, and we do a great job. It comes at a price, though.
Councilmember Palmer.
Well, I mean, again, I'm going to say, when we gave that property to the Sherman Associates, we kind of cast the die on getting rid of the park because there's really nowhere else to park in that location. I also have to smile because last week we opened up Silver Lake Pool, which wasn't on your plan, and it was in bad shape for 20 years. And I remember for the last 8 years getting the phone call going, cast iron may not go, but may not open, but we made it work. And so I don't see the hope here for this field, and I think your answer, Mr. Wall, is that there will not be a ball field there, and I think you're right to say that for many reasons. But one of the big one for me is that there's no parking, and I don't want a parking lot along the river.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
The ramp is only one more block away. I park there a lot.
Oh my God, a whole block.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And it's free.
We will take a 8-minute break.
I just quick, I have to leave because I'm actually throwing the first pitch out at the Hawker Stadium this evening.
Very good.
After we had 200 children between the ages of 6 and 12 at the Honkers Field today doing play ball, which was really cool. It was a problem, and guess who was out again this year directing traffic? Because there's nowhere to park.
Thank
So,
you, Mayor.
Good point.
Okay, we're gonna get started. We have, yes, we are restarting. We have Heather Corcoran here with our legislative session recap and update. So take it away.
Thank you, Council President and council members. Excited to be here today. It's been 21 days since the session ended on May 18th, so we'll talk a little bit about what happened there. And then we're also, no rest for the weary, looking forward ahead to the next legislative session, and wanted to start the ball rolling with some potential ideas and really just to kick off the kind of next part in our cycle and process there. Here's a guiding question, looking for your feedback today or between now and the fall when we'll kick into high gear. As you'll remember, the recent legislative session was a little bit of a repeat of the first year of the biennium back in 2025. We had as close of divided legislature as you could have. There were co-chairs in all of the House committees from each party, and the DFL had a new party leader, Zach Stevenson, who took over for Speaker Emerita Hortman after the assassination in June of last year. It was a non-budget year, so there were low expectations on whether the legislature would even really have much that would get across the finish line during the session. It also was it's an election year. Usually when I give this slide during the beginning of the session, I put a question mark after bonding year. I took that away, as you'll hear in a second. And there were a ton of bills introduced just even this past part of the session, not counting the ones from the previous year that were still able to be activated on. 91 bills were signed into law. Obviously, a lot of those did include smaller individual bills because we have omnibus bills in Minnesota. So when we walked into the legislative session, even before then, you all had given us the direction to seek some specific Rochester legislation, which you were excited to do. These basically 4 requests here, in addition to lots of other requests that were included in your material. The multi-page booklet covers a lot of the issue areas that we are ready to respond to if they come up during the legislative session. And I'll just cut right to the ending. We had really remarkable outcomes in this space this session. It's not up there. Thanks. Maybe Ann is working on.
You can continue.
Well, that was the
We
drum
do have
roll,
it on
but
our-
sure, I
we
can.
do have it on our.
Keep it rolling.
Yeah, we've seen it. And
Perfect, yes.
Go ahead.
You've memorized these because it's good news for the city. We were able to come forward and through the legislature's really key activation in having a bonding bill this year, and our request being at the forefront for our East Umbro sewer and water infrastructure. We were able to receive $13.224 million, and I'll talk a little bit about that request in a second. After the second year of the request related to the Chateau liquor, we were able to get that through as well in April of the session. There were 2 other provisions related to work on sports and recreation that were able to be favorable to continue the work and conversations that are happening locally related to RCTC and also the Regional Sports and Recreation Complex. Cool. In your materials, you can see if you want to read more, since it might have been a while since we've talked about the East Zumbro sewer and water project. But just a reminder, this is queuing off of a previous request that we've had federally, and we were able to receive $1 million earlier this year federally. And then we went to the state legislature with a $9.2 million request for the first phase of the project, thanks to those of you who helped with, thanks, Ann, the bonding tours that were held in Rochester over the fall. Bonding requests are a long game. We put a lot of effort into making sure that our story is told in advance of the legislative session, not only to our local legislators, but the bonding committees, and then during key moments during the legislative session, being ready to respond to their questions, potentially pivot a request, downsize or upsize it. In this case, they were able to provide additional funding than what we had originally asked for, which we're very grateful for. And that was a bipartisan effort, and we're really, really pleased with that and excited. You'll see some next steps there on the slide. It'll come to you again as a council in later this year further, and we've got the public works teams already working hard to roll that out along with RPU in a coordinated fashion. And this, again, will help open up more housing by upsizing the sewer and water pipes throughout the city, focusing on the southwest part of the community. We also had a lot of positive outcomes just generally for cities that then are positive for us, things that we would apply for or benefit from potentially. Those first three related to local road and bridge improvements, lead service line, and the library construction grants were from the bonding bill. We would presumably apply for some funding through those as we have in the past. Housing infrastructure bonds and the FHPAP program related to homelessness prevention are also something we support in our priorities. Those were funded pretty robustly through the housing bill. And then our partnerships with other groups that the city participates as a member through the Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails groups, the Municipal Utility Association, the League of Minnesota Cities, the Minnesota Library Association, all had other requests that some of which we echoed and saw positive results on that you can see listed here. I also included a little note about some things that did not get through that are on our list, and pending council approval later this year when you consider 2027, those would be things that we would continue to carry on forward. Wanted to provide you a slide on LGA.
Heather, before you go to that, can I
Yep.
just ask a kind of a background question? So, with the East Sumbro sewer and water, we asked for 9, we got 4 million more. What's the backstory on that? Why, is that something where did they overfund a lot of projects, or did we get something special here?
I said the long game in that when I was describing it, because I think it was a iterative process that all of you, I think almost everyone in this room participated in some way to tell our story there, whether it was a photo of the future pipes or housing being a really hot issue at the Capitol. I think the other part was sometimes we get lumped into the other cities of the first class, and there's interest in providing parity there when they look at what other communities are getting. We're also a very unique, growing economic engine of the city or of the state, as we've talked about. And I really want to give a lot of credit to our local legislators because they were tenacious in asking for Rochester's fair share through the bonding committee chairs and doing a lot of advocacy in that way. And we are seeing the results of that with this amount. So a really team effort from top to bottom.
Thanks. Councilmember Palmer.
If I remember correctly, back in January, when we said we wanted to go to one issue, and I think people were recommending 3, would you say that was obviously successful to do that?
Yeah, I think we had really positive results from the bonding requests that we put forward, whether it's one or multiple. If there's a desire to fund Rochester's requests at a certain amount, they will do that presumably for, what we're looking to get funding for.
Do you recommend that for next year?
That could be something that, we should have further conversations about, whether you'd want to just go in for the future phase requests, so asking for money for phase 3 and 4, or if you want another project in addition.
Part of the later part of this conversation is what would you consider to be priorities for next year? And then depending on what those are, I think you can evaluate the best strategy for that.
Okay, just before you go to the next slide, you're talking about parity with the other cities of the first class. Now go to the next slide.
I did give you that one, yes. So not necessarily a legislative outcome because there were no changes to the LGA overall appropriation during the session. And in some ways that's, something to be noted because sometimes that gets cut when they're looking at changing funding around. But as part of the legislative session, there's typically a projection run that's shared at some point when there is a bill related to LGA. And so as part of that, we wanted to forecast that the LGA amount is projected to go down for the following year. And this is something that the folks will remember we encountered back around 2020 and 2021. There was a temporary hold harmless provision that was funded to prevent that cliff basically from happening at that point. And then there's kind of been other efforts since then, but if there's no other changes to the overall LGA appropriation, then this would be the around what's estimated, that it's not certified until August of this year.
Remind us when the LGA formula is to be looked at the next time.
Great question. It's teed off of the census, so every 10 years, but then usually a year or two after that census update.
So 32.
And it's certified every 2 years. I mean, so you have cities coming in and out of the formula as well. I would just note, though, I mean, you can't understate the impact of this. I know as you reconcile budget challenges, which we'll start to talk about that over the summer. I mean, if you look back even to 2019, and we were on some form of decline even back then. I mean, we've lost about almost $4 million of LGA. I mean, that's a 4% levy increase on your end to have to accommodate that reduction at the state, and obviously it compounds year after year. So, I mean, the formula is just not friendly for us, given all the things that go into that. But I think it's a real thing that you all have to consider, and we'll talk more about how we address this gap in the budget process. But it's not an immaterial consideration.
Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, just on from the state perspective, do they continue to fund LGA at the same level, or is that funding dropping too?
I think it's the same level, but there's no inflationary increase automatically, and that's one thing that the League of Minnesota Cities often advocates for. So if they don't increase it on its own in next year during the budget year, then it will have less to spread out.
I had heard some discussion about it potentially getting cut as part of the budget reconciliation. I don't believe that happened in any big way, but was that a discussion?
Definitely last year more than this year. Yeah, toward the end of session, if you'll remember, there was.
Do you have a high level number that at the state they fund LGA at like 400 million? I don't have a number.
I do. I can get that to you.
Okay, we can do it separately. We don't need to do it here.
Great. So before we transition into next year, I just wanted to really, again, thank everyone, again, that participated in various ways at the Capitol, and you'll see a lot of familiar faces on this slide. We had a high amount of presence at the Capitol, and again, I think that does keep us in the forefront of our local legislators' minds and others at the Capitol, and so a really big thanks. I know it's not a small effort to take time to do that, but it is noticed at the Capitol and appreciated. We participated in a lot of association days with the Library Association, utilities, transportation.
I just want to comment that you notice that Councilmember Miller looks really happy in his pictures, and I do not.
And many people came up multiple times for the League of Minnesota Cities Day, and we had a lot of new teammates too that engaged in the process at the Capitol, and I think that was noticed as well. So appreciate that and the time that people spend. So this might look familiar. This is kind of our annual cycle, and I didn't put an arrow saying we are here on this slide because we're kind of in between two of the colors. So on the left side, we're at the end of May here, but not quite to July. So getting ready to kick into the League of Minnesota Cities policy committees and our own internal process before we turn the page into 2027. As we look at potential priorities, obviously these are on the front of our minds, looking at your council direction related to your priorities and principles. And then, just other context to walk into the next year. Obviously, it'll be after a big election where all 201 legislators will have been running for their seats. We'll have a new governor, we know for sure. There could be new committee structure. Different parties have elected to have different focuses. For example, 8-10 years ago, there wasn't even a dedicated committee to the housing issue. There could be other emerging topics that they want to focus on. There'll be new committee chairs, and part of that is the 43-plus retirements. And someone totaled up the years of experience that those people have, and it's over 500 years. So 43 isn't really a remarkably odd amount. It's about a third of the legislature. That seems to happen every general election cycle, but the amount of experience that is leaving the Capitol is something that is rare and will have an impact. It was also noted, for example, all the GOP members of the tax committee in the Senate are retiring and won't be returning, including our own Senator Nelson. And so thinking about how the institutional knowledge about the wide variety of topics they cover will be a steep learning curve and an opportunity for us to educate incoming legislators. So this is just to get, like I said, kind of a idea generation, not meant to be comprehensive, not meant to be anything really with, firm backing or strong research, but looking to you all for guidance on what could be our requests going into the next session and how do we use these next months to research further and to dive in on some interest areas. As Deputy Administrator Parrish mentioned, what does bonding look like for us? It's not a typical bonding year next year, but we should certainly be ready and have requests if there is interest in that. Queuing off of previous discussions around the disconnected parcels, are there other ways to fund trails or sidewalks or ADA, public infrastructure right-of-way improvements? RPU certainly has a few, energy and also water-related based on, depending what comes out of their water resource plan. That could be part of our request at the Capitol. And really, looking to you all in the conversations you're going to have over the next couple of months on what topics are rising to your interest. And we'll also be asking teammates for theirs as well.
Councilmember Palmer.
How are we doing with parkland dedication?
We've been in active conversations with community development and parks team as they're doing the work that they've shared with you and seeing what statutory changes versus local policy changes make sense in that space. And I think when they come back to you all with that, we would be able to take further direction on what statutory changes, whether it's asking for the same clarification we've wanted in the past years to collect on redevelopment sites, essentially, to do what Minneapolis and St. Paul have special authority to do, and or if there's other things or other ways we want to describe that issue.
Would that get us to our parity with our cities again to do that?
In a unique way, yes.
Wouldn't that be pretty easy to do, really?
I don't know about easy.
What's necessary?
It would have a really great impact locally, yes.
Mr. Parrish, you mentioned when we had LGA up that there were some ideas around kind of that type of funding. Is that coming up, or is on another slide, or can you speak to that now?
No, I think I was talking about the bonding projects as something forthcoming in terms of if you have specific areas that you want us to be looking at. And we obviously have phase 2 of the East Sunboro project, right? I mean, that's something we can continue. However, a lot of times you want to have made some progress on phase 1 by the time you're making the ask. And, really you're trying to get your requests in to position yourself for the bonding tours. And we submit into the state systems and all that just to, really kind of get our projects in front of people. But I mean, we're also open, and we at the staff level will go through the process reflected on the, on the chart here and bring you some recommendations on what we think are good projects. But it's also an opportunity for you to say, like, we'd really like you to spend some time thinking about project A, B, C, or D as we go into this late summer, early fall timeframe, and when we bring you legislative priorities toward the end of the year.
Council President, if I may.
Go ahead.
Maybe you were asking about when we mentioned that we would be talking about the LGA drop during the budget process. And you may or may not recall, but in 2024, when we saw the hold harmless, we actually, we didn't, the lion's share of that $1.2 million, we applied to additional payments into the CIP for pavement preservation. So that's really your question there is, we tried not to put it in the general fund and then have a surprise for you in general operations. But that becomes the question, the additional funding for pavement preservation that had been going in there and whether or not you absorb that into the levy as additional funding or not. So we did try to isolate it, knowing that whenever the hold harmless was going to go away, assuming that the hold harmless might go away, so that it wasn't as big of a disruption. Not that it's not a disruption, but we weren't putting all of those dollars in before. So there's implications, but there's options.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Keen.
Yeah, and next year, again, I know it's good to have the bonding thing. I agree that it'd be nice to have some progress, and I'll call it phase 1 and 2 of the Zumbro, and then trying to get 3. But my take would be is this is like looking at non-bonding and what some of those things are. And I don't have a big list, but the couple things I'll mention is that we have been participating in the League of Minnesota Cities policy things. And there are some like things there that can be non-funding kind of things that make improvements for staff. Some things been working in the clerk's office, but also we've had some good luck with benefits and for certain things. So those sort of like under the radar sort of things are good to do in those years. The other one that does jump off the page of me is RPU related. There's so many things going on now, potential with water and that, and I don't know if there's help with the state, but I don't think we generally look at that. So it's good to think of that as what are those sort of things with water, but also with the, as we move into the, move away from SIMPA into our own power generation, are there things that municipalities, especially large municipalities like ours, could get benefit through state things? One of the things that's come up, and when we look at putting things onto transmission, there's a 50 megawatt limit. Is that an old number that should be 100 meg now? And there are things that don't cost people at the state anything to do that could really help us going into the 2030s and beyond.
Councilmember Miller.
Thank you. I know in the prior bonding project area and thinking about bonding tours, we've talked about Civic Center Drive and Broadway redesign. I think that's still important to the development of our downtown, and I think is a very compelling tour, seeing the current state and understanding the connectivity gaps that they cause, particularly for our modal goals and thinking about the work that we've done north and surrounding areas of those that then become barriers to entry and exits from downtown. So I would express my support for a version of a bonding project that involves redesigning those. I think the Trail System 2 is a great asset that we have in the city that we know doesn't quite connect all the way downtown and doesn't provide the safety that people are looking for and experience when they're in the outer areas of our trail system, when they're totally off-road and able to be safe and protected from any vehicles on the roadway. In the transportation area, I do wonder if there's an opportunity to look at our regional city partners as ourselves as a regional center and a regional healthcare center. There's the Go Marty automated rural transit project that's happening in Grand Rapids and seems to be experiencing quite a bit of success and is quite popular. And I think of many of our own neighbors in this region who travel into Rochester for healthcare who would benefit from a system like that. I think there may be a regional partnership case to be made. And also thinking about how we're moving into a new transit operations contract in the future, if there are ways that we can tell the story of Rochester and the need for investment in our transit system, or any ways that we might advance and be a model for the state with our Fare-Free BRT pilot and telling the story of innovation that we're doing through transportation. Just to highlight those. And then when I see the RPU-related priorities, I think of our renewable energy goals for 2030 and what avenues there may be through a different alignment of the legislature to tell that story and potentially solicit additional support to be able to meet those goals or exceed those goals.
I think we can certainly continue to, evaluate and monitor all those things, and some are operational, some are capital. Bonding obviously tends to be in the capital space. We're closely monitoring the county's parks and trail planning process for those regional trail connections that hopefully will connect into Rochester, but then connect Rochester to regional trail destinations. There's also some collaboration and conversation with the county around the potential for regional public safety training facility investments, and I think we'll continue to monitor that as we bring forward recommendations to you all. So that and all what else you said, certainly we will put on the list.
I just want to add that, and I do agree this past year with Councilmember Palmer that having a single message really was helpful. It really, you think about those 201 legislators and they're getting so many messages from so many different directions. And if they're getting one message from Rochester, I think that's helpful. I also think that we've done a really good job in the last 2 sessions of telling the story of Rochester as an economic engine, but at the same time talking about that we do not have the benefit of a regional planning agency that does transportation, parks, and sewer and water like a lot of the cities in the metro area. And so I think that message is starting to get through, and I think there's a huge opportunity with the turnover that's happening at the legislature to really refine that message and let them know that Rochester is that economic engine, but that we do need state support, and then adding that the piece on LGA, that we do not get that level of support that some of our peer cities do. Councilmember Wall.
It is not as if the legislature will not work on housing, because I know they do that a lot, but I would certainly be supportive of Rochester throwing its weight behind anything that would help enhance our ability to provide housing at all different kinds of levels and our city isn't the only city that needs that, but boy, we need to be advocates.
And to that point, Councilmember, and I do want to commend our team, Mr. Yetzer and others, on really putting Rochester out there as a model with our Unified Development Code and really helping educate legislators on what municipalities can do. I think that helped in that discussion when it comes to housing. Other thoughts? None? Thank you. Oh, go ahead,
I'll just
Councilmember.
add to that line, and I know it's in the slide about LGA, but using the areas where we're ready to work with the state legislature on reform, housing policy reform, zoning reform, et cetera, as a carrot to build into the LGA formula, I think is a compelling message as well. When we've seen other city councils react to potential reforms by saying they would stop development entirely, stop platting lots. I think telling the case and being very clear that we're ready to work with the state to capitalize on this opportunity is, I would support putting LGA in there as a potential formula revision to further build that into state code.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And study session schedule.
1 minute. Council President, council members, I did just want to note one adjustment here. On the 13th, we are looking at adding that study session that you talked about for financing options for additional sports and indoor sports and recreation. If there's concerns about that, it would be helpful to know. You don't have to tell me today. But we are looking at eyeing that July 13th option there. So your next study session, June 22nd, some hot topics here: Elton Hills Drive, Northwest Concept Design Review, the longest way of saying Elton Hills Drive. Urban 3, so we are bringing back much more robust data than what you saw at the DMC joint meeting. That has been completed. And then an update on tax increment financing. And what that's really looking at is a look back of where you are on a lot of your different districts. That's the primary focus of that, to kind of tell the story of how that has helped develop, but then where we are with those being able to be diffused at some point.
Thank you. Next, we will, go ahead, Councilmember.
Will that tax increment financing update include projects that are coming off or will soon come off within the next 2, 3, 5 years?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Next, we will be going into executive session. Attorney Spindler Craig, can you lead us into that?
Yes, Mr. President, these items do not need a vote to move into closed. You will adjourn to handle 2 closed topics consistent with the published agenda. The first item is pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05 Subdivision 3B. That is the matter to discuss potential litigation matter related to the CapEx 2020 transmission lines. And then the second item is pursuant to Minnesota Statute 13D.05 Subdivision 3C3 to consider offers or counteroffers for the purchase or sale of real property. I won't list all of the PINs that are in the published agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Spindler. Craig, we will recess to room 104 in 8 minutes.